Друзья, если всем добрый день, здравствуйте.
Dear friends, good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for your interest towards our session, City as a beneficiary of the neighboring agglomerations at Moscow Urban Forum 2017. I'm Artem Gevsemenko, an expert in the Center of Strategic Developments. I would be acting as a moderator today, and I would like to introduce my guests right to the north. So, Dmitry Sivayev, an expert for urban development in World Bank. Alina Harkness, the research officer on project for city management in 21st century, the Brookings Institute, and Viktor Ageyev, an acting governor of the Perm region. So, dear colleagues, our tasks and the topic of our today's session, if we would extend on it, so is to discuss a process. Many cities and regions are involved, trying to get to promote themselves in a number of ratings. So, and it has to do with living standards, social and economic development, and it is a question of what they are based on, building their strategy, where they see their opportunities for growth, and how they structure their work with that potential to promote it, and analyzing the way this or that strategy, we can find out whether the bets were made correctly and what contributed mostly to its success. And let's talk about how it's being developed, how should we interact with our neighboring regions. So, Alexey Viktorovich, please welcome Alexey Novikov, a professor and Vysokovsky High School of Urbanism's dean. Now, I can open the session, and I would like to give the floor and to Viktor Ageyev, Viktor, Perm, and the Perms region, so is the territory you know for years as a manager, as an administrator. So please let us know, how do you see the current situation in the region, and could you please tell us about challenges the region faces and also its main cities? Thank you, Artem. So, you know, the topic of our today's discussion is very much in line with the relevant agenda for the Perm region, because the Perm region on the one hand has to compete for human resources with the Russian leading megacities Moscow and St. Petersburg, and it is also surrounded by other agglomerations and regions which develop dynamically, which include Yekaterinburg, Kazan, and Ufa, and at the same time it is competing, and it has to answer and respond to challenges offered by the dynamically developing regions I mentioned. The other reason why I see our today's discussion having a very appropriate topic, because when, as I said, when a region has to interact with other strong regions, we start to be involved in that competition And we face the need to survive and to prove that, to prove our identity. So this was the way how strategy for Perm region was formulated back in 2011. So the city of Perm and Perm region should have become beneficiaries of being neighbors to these regions. And of course, it's a bit of a challenge to compete with the leading cities and agglomerations, but there is a division of labor. We can become, we can carry the key competencies, and these centers share Russia's social and economic development success. And we raised the question where we could become centers of competences, centers which would offer competences leading urban agglomerations would be interested in. And we outlined some areas. We realized we can become a center for competencies in growing our high-tech industries, also human and career growth. So historically, Perm is an industrial region, so the industries are being upgraded and modernized, and they are going up to a next level of competitiveness, and people interested to actualize themselves in this high-tech wave, so they could focus on companies and enterprises existing in the region. And we realized that the successful secondary education is a precondition and a benefit for the success. So why is it an advantage? Because we have a lot of people who live in better developed regions, in bigger agglomerations and cities, so they feel like bringing their children to Perm or take them to Perm to study, because Perm historically enjoyed high level of education, much higher than Russia's average, and it's the leader for Russian regions for the scores school graduates get. And we are also competitive in HR development for high-tech industries. So many federal companies like Rostelecom, a leader in Russian telecom industry, are based in Perm. And other companies in our digital economy could also find the destination point in Perm. But to carry these competences, you shouldn't also limit by companies that work in modern areas, but you should also offer people living standards and conditions they would be happy with. Because today, everybody tries to attract creative, highly mobile class, which builds up this success. And of course, we have a long way to go. In the millennium years, we didn't get what are the Russian megacities with a population of above million got. We didn't get a new airport which could become a transport hub. We couldn't get a new railway station. We couldn't implement typical investment projects like water sports park. And now we need to catch up quickly. This is what we do this year. We are completing new airport terminals, which will ensure us a good transport accessibility. We are building a multimodal hub, and we are dealing with new investors. So, Viktor Gennadievich, thank you for this deep overview. If I got it correctly, so your stake is for Perm as a city, but working with other cities in the region. So you didn't mention it, so maybe it's been carried out in a different form. No, of course, we are not limited by the city of Perm as far as our economic growth sources are concerned. So we have 2.5 agglomerations in the region. So the Perm agglomeration, Berezniki and Solikamsk agglomeration, located closer to the north of the Perm region, where we have the most powerful growth points with the 15% of potassium fertilizers being produced there, and titanium and major chemical industries. And this is like an agglomeration with two cores. So it emerged as a response to an accident at a mine in Berezniki with the soil sedimentation, where we had to relocate people from obsolete buildings. However, this situation gave us a chance because these totally new neighborhoods and social infrastructure sites offered us a chance to have this new agglomeration and create a new growth point. And this accident actually initiated the process. And also Tchaikovsky and Lodochkino is another agglomeration, because the next core of this agglomeration, so why I said 2.5 agglomeration, because the other city is in a different region. So our neighbors have fairly developed agriculture and oil production, but the rural settlements are relatively small. And we wanted to create a point for getting social benefits to improve the quality of life. So, because population there has higher income and they are very much demanding to quality of life, which is hard to be satisfied from Perm. That's why we need to create there a new point for social growth. And this is what the government of Perm region is focused on. Thank you so much for commenting on that in a detail. Dmitry, now, regarding World Bank, this work with 2.5 agglomerations, 2.5 agglomerations, maybe you have a methodology which could be applied to the existing situation, because you see that there is an existing challenge. Thank you.
I don't really understand what you mean by the question. There is no doubt that the strategy of region should be based on the strategy of cities comprising it. I have a fresh example. Recently, we have done a job in the bad regions of Poland. The European Union says that such regions do not reach the level of development, do not reach 70% of the level of development of the European Union. They have a situation of industrial problems and so on. But we found out that the problem is not about the region itself, but a huge gap between rural and industrial urban population. For example, if you take Rzeszów, a city in the south of Poland, where there was an aviation cluster producing things for Boeing and leading manufacturers of the world, and still this region is one of the worst regions of the city, worst regions of the country, and maybe some not successful regions. I'm not speaking about Perm region because you are not the right example, but cities can live in global networks and they create sources of competitive advantage and growth without any relation with the condition to the territory. So we have to think about agglomeration. It's good that Perm doesn't think about the city of Perm only. They think about the whole region. And I believe that there are many things to be stimulated and improved in Perm to create a bigger agglomeration effect. And secondary agglomeration should also be developed, especially in a Russian context. People tend to forget about it. I had experience of working in the city of Ulyanovsk, in the region of Ulyanovsk in Bashkortostan, and the scenario there is similar. In Ulyanovsk, there are two cities that are located 150 kilometers away from each other. Their specializations are different, but they can create an agglomeration together. In Bashkortostan, there is Ufa, large city, but also a cluster of small towns around Stolitamaka in the center of the region. They have their own industrial specific features, but there is no common strategy of development for the region. So I believe that the development of secondary agglomerations could become a source of further development. I don't know if I gave the answer to your question. Yeah, let me add something to your answer. As long as we speak about cities as beneficiaries, we think about successful practices of neighborhood with someone who is stronger than you, with someone or something who can successfully implement some things, not having so many resources as Perm region or the cities that we have just heard about. What mechanisms can we use? What mechanisms are clear and transparent? What mechanisms can we use to improve the situation? Why don't the mechanisms work now, and what should we do for them to be efficient? Yeah, thank you very much. A very good question. It's really important. Why is it important? Because if you are close to large markets, it's one of important factors that creates the development of the whole region. We had projects in India, in European Union. I will present one more survey at 5 p.m. at another session, and we demonstrated that if you are close to large regions, it's a very important factor for growth, of course. Then, in Russia, it is also like that. Mechanisms. The most important thing is to understand that if there is a large city or a region near you, then you have to find something that will be complementary to that region. This is exactly what our colleague from Perm region said. Find your strength, find your competitive advantage. There are a lot of examples. You can speak about Hong Kong and Shenzhen, where Hong Kong is like a business and service hub, and Shenzhen is a production hub. And they have like a border between them. You can take an example with the border Singapore and Johor, a city which is located just at the other side of the bay. Understanding that in Singapore there are a lot of people with high income but not enough land, they create amusement parks in another region, and it's very easy to cross the border, and people would love to go there to spend time. So it's just about finding complementing issues. The best example in Russia is Central Federal region, and huge gap between the development of Moscow region, and other regions of central Russia. It seems that these central regions are located so close to Moscow. The huge market is next to you. It's a huge driving force for your development, but we do not see this development. What can the regions do? They can develop clusters where they have competitive advantage, but there might be some borders, limitations related to policies on structures. I do not know what an important factor for Moscow is. One of the factors is outflow of people. The gap between salaries in Moscow and other regions is 3 times, a huge difference in potentials and abilities. There is transportation problem. Like if you want to sell something in Moscow, you have to come to Moscow, and it's hard to go here. Once I talked to my colleagues, and they said that it takes you about 1 hour to go to Tver, because we have a new train. And since that time, the economy of Tver has started to develop really radically, simply because they introduced a new high-speed train. People believe that as soon as there is an opportunity to come to Tver really quickly, Tver can bring something complementary from Moscow, can create some functions. Yeah, you can go quickly to Tver, to Moscow, but you should also go quickly from Moscow to Tver. Right. When you develop these connections, we do not know how the balance will look like. Or will it be more efficient for the large center or for a small city? Let me give you an example from England, because I live there and I know what happens there. London is a huge city. There is everything there, very complicated economic system, advanced services, but there are cities like Cambridge and Oxford with educational functions and innovative facilities, because it's a different industry with different conditions. Then there is a city called Milton Keynes, and all the urbanists like the city. It's like a new town built from scratch, a lot of circular crossroads, a lot of lands. So many functions like laboratories require a lot of land, and many corporations locate their laboratories there, and it's easy to go from there to the head office in London. Croydon, a district in the south of London, it developed thanks to the back office services to financial sector, because headquarters can be located in the city district, and some functions should not be located there. They can easily have offices far away from there, well, maybe 40 minutes away from there. It takes just 1 hour to go from Perm to Moscow. So why cannot banking facilities work not in Moscow but in Perm? And by the way, city of Moscow is still under construction. Yes, and now we can work distantly from Perm. I'll ask a question to Alexei a little bit later about all the mechanisms, but I would like to first give the floor to Laina, because we tend to say, as long as we do not forget, as long as we do not go too far. We have heard about experience of working in Perm, about some constructions, development projects. Anyway, they will all say that it's important to work with the center. So can you tell us about some city policies or strategies which are efficient? What strategies are future-oriented? How they can help cities develop? How can cities be driving forces of the growth of regions?
Спасибо. So I will give a bit of a sweep through some comparative examples. So I work at the Brookings Institution. Our lens is global. But I live in Chicago, which is a city of 3 million people in a region of 6 million people, and have all the same challenges of the benefits of a shared regional economy, but also the challenges of sharing and distributing housing, transportation, quality schools, very unevenly distributed across our region. And so the ways that we've sort of dealt with this at home, there are a lot of coordinated approaches. So for example, around ecological issues and managing our waterways. We live on a very large lake and a complex system of rivers, and so managing our watershed, which is not exclusively in the city of Chicago, but of course impacts all the residents of the city of Chicago, we have a number of different cooperative NGO-led efforts to help to manage that. We receive federal grants as well to support those collaborations, but they're largely informal. They, for the most part, do not have the force of law. There are some exceptions to that. We have something called the Great Lakes Compact that helps us with watershed management across a multi-state region. But basically, we have a lot of very informal collaboration around very specific issues that matter to specific constituent groups. So that is fine. Having formal regional government, we don't have regional governments in the United States at all. You know, we have states and sub-national, sub-state governments. So there are few exceptions where formal structures have permitted more regional collaboration, and one of them is something we call a metropolitan planning organization, an MPO. So the Metropolitan Planning Organization actually has the charge to develop a comprehensive regional plan for our 6-county region of Chicago, the Chicago metropolitan region, which includes a number of municipalities. It doesn't actually cross state lines, but it does involve a number of different suburban and even quasi-rural communities in this planning process. And the reason it's important to distinguish this mechanism is that federal transportation dollars flow through our city and all of those municipalities to generate support and revenue for projects, but they don't flow through unless we have that regional plan in place. So there's a formal incentive to do that regional planning, which ensures that it happens routinely and that communities are engaged in the process. But that is one of the very few formal mechanisms to do regional work in an actual sort of comprehensive way. And it's going on in a lot of different regions around the United States. But there was a specific federal move to create these new metropolitan planning organizations to serve that role. So that's one example. Then I think there are places around the world where we are starting to see a move to actually change form of government to give more powers to regions. And that is something I think there are many people in the United States would hope for someday. It's going to be a long time before we get there because we have much more cooperative arrangements and states have a lot of power in the federal system that we have. But in places like England, in Chile, in France, in Italy, there have been moves recently to actually grant formal powers to regional governments. And this is something that we are watching very closely. At the Brookings Institution, we're very interested in what it looks like to devolve very specific powers from higher levels of government to cities, but also then to give powers to, as in England, combined authorities that actually formally represent the elected heads of a number of different municipalities and make shared decisions about transport, housing, social service delivery for the region, because they know that they exist as a region, and even if they don't yet have the formal governance powers, they maybe need to get them. And so we're very interested in these places around the world that are changing their central government laws, really, to grant more power to those places. So we have some case studies we are publishing on our website that will be available talking about these dynamics that are in play right now in a lot of them.
Спасибо большое.
Very much for your detailed answer of current processes happening in the world. Alexei, I'd like to give the floor to you. As long as you're still here, could you comment, please? And could you compare American mechanisms and trends with European Union? Is it possible to implement such mechanisms in Russia? What do you think about it? Thank you very much for your question. It's a key question. It's a key issue. Today, in the political context, there are two topics on the agenda. They are truly relevant to me, and I feel some doubts about them. First topic about agglomeration. Again, in our political context, these words get some quasi-national forms. And second thing, the Ministry of Economy and many economists, my friends, liberal economists, think that agglomeration is a source of economic growth. They say it's an opportunity to push the buttons and simply increase the speed of economic development of the country. I think that both opinions are far away from what we actually have to do with agglomerations. The first thing that I want to say is that agglomeration is a living area. If you want to have some associations, you shouldn't use the word management about it, because it's all about bringing together different interests, municipal government, federal government, regional government, inhabitants. They should be like mediators and not managers, not like managers in corporations. But unfortunately, many people take corporate mindset and use it for the management of agglomeration. They think that it's easier. You can create an easier structure, you can easily understand it, but in reality, you have to have a platform for bringing together different interests. This part, as I believe, is truly relevant. And I worry about it, because you can tackle certain issues of concern, like you can buy, for example, equipment to take snow away from this city, and some regions can cooperate and start working on it. You can set fees for transportation, public transportation, trains, and so on. Again, it's more like a function of a central city, but it's also about cooperation with municipalities. It's a different territorial cooperation. For example, you can develop social dwelling, and then you will have another area of focus and another territorial specific feature, and agglomerations can work with the city center because of a new service. I think we should think in terms of services, like you begin to tackle the issues of concern exactly in the places where it is needed, and you have to agree different interests, and then you create you shouldn't create borders. You shouldn't put the borders on the region and say, like, we take the region and we will be successful and efficient here. I don't think it's the right model. City is a beneficiary of the neighboring agglomerations. For example, if you take Moscow, it's a city, but around it there's Tula, Ryazan, Tver, and other small towns. It's a wonderful alternative to a boring sleeping district. You should take into account that transportation mobility gets better. It takes just 1 hour to go from Tver to Moscow. It's a wonderful opportunity for people to live in a beautiful town. There are a lot of historical regions preserved there, a lot of beautiful apartments, more diversity. The environmental situation is much better than in Moscow, and people can live there. What if you create alternative to sleeping districts in such towns? They have not only dwelling there, by the way, there are also jobs there. And I don't understand when people say, oh my God, people move from Tver to Moscow. Okay, they move, but in 15 years they can come back if you create a good alternative there in your environment. It's a long-term project. So we shouldn't worry too much about it. Of course, there are problems, taxes, social infrastructure, financial schemes, and so on. I think there is a wonderful opportunity here when we speak about agglomerations and we say that towns can be an alternative to sleeping districts around big cities. It's a good opportunity to try to create local government in Russia, because now it has a lot of problems in terms of finances, legal aspects, and public aspects, and so on.
the opponents say, well, we have a single structure, and we will have to argue with them. Yeah, but we need that check and balances system, the system of reconciling. So it's like a constructive conflict, the system which allows you to move forward, not to oppose bureaucracy and to use that reconciliation just to resolve the problem. So I loved how my colleague from the Brookings Institute said, we would love to have a foundation of a regional government, but it will take us like many years, maybe dozens of years. And it's not like the case in Moscow when people would vote for like this renovation law in 3 weeks, and which would impact 1.5 million people. This is not the right approach to a living city with the population. So this reconciliation process is why you should keep your agglomeration intact. Leave it alone. And of course, it's not an institution or a source of economic growth. We had an argument with our colleagues. So they said that there is an economics inside the city with infrastructure, with factories and so on, and there is the economics of the city. So this is about magnifying social roles. For a mayor, it's essential to have various social roles in a city, but not to have petrochemical industries in the city. You need to have an ambient, an environment and atmosphere. Alexei, thank you for rethinking processes which are underway. And I would like to go back to Viktor Gennadievich and his answers, his opinions on decisions being proposals. So we shortlisted the potential mechanisms. I would like to wrap up our today's session. Thank you, Artyom. Thank you for that honor. And as a summary, I would like to comment on all the statements by our speakers. I was most of all impressed by statements of Alexei Viktorovich. And I would like to begin with giving feedback on that. So if you remember an old movie, we will need to spend a year on that. Well, it's worth spending a year on finding truth. But the real life, the practice is much more difficult than that, much more complicated. And I would not like to insist that we are talking about absolute truth, but we firmly believe that agglomerations are required not to clear the snow out of the streets, nor are they intended to build social housings. So agglomerations are a tool for economic growth, a very efficient one, and all examples with economic successes in the Russian Federation, letting alone Yamalo-Nenets and Khanty-Mansiysk regions where most mineral resources are concentrated. So in all other places, the success owed to agglomerations. So secondly, in our opinion, urban agglomerations require administrations, because otherwise you offer a strategy, a concept, and you believe to execute a strategy and implement a policy, but you're not getting anywhere. You should be either brave enough to admit that you need some social functions, or maybe there is no point in meeting, so there should be meetings of urban planners to discuss some narrow specialist and technical issues. Also, we believe that agglomerations contribute to maintaining the structure of how people live. So of course it's imperfect. We have like mono cities, but we are not Poland. We cannot afford to have vast territories without people. If we're talking about Perm region, we don't only have rural population, but we have small cities. We have a city of Kitalov where the coal mine closed down, and this is a city. We are relocating population for 20 years, but this is a living city. It is still there. So we need to accelerate links between the cities and create alternatives for social development and to keep this framework. And Eloina, I was really delighted by what you said, because you said something that fully corresponds to our vision and our understanding. Yes, principles of planning and organizing areas and principles of managing areas should be set at the level, at the national level or state level in the case of the United States of America. But certain questions, and I would like to agree with Alexei Viktorovich, certain issues should go to municipal level, but those not related with the territory development. So as for the living standards, this should be the scope of responsibility of municipal administrations. So many thanks to all panelists. Well, so this is what I should say. Sorry. Yeah. So colleagues, my colleagues asked me to summarize it, to sum it up. So I think we managed to cover the situation, to look at it from different angles and to understand what options for progress we have and what are the obstacles on our way. Thank you so much. So let's conclude this session, and we would like to invite all of you to stay here for our next session, which contradicts, which has something in common with our session. So it's about special economic zones and